Ever feel like you're drowning in information but never really getting to the good stuff, the insights that stick with you?
Yeah, we're bombarded with information, but how much of it really sinks in?
Exactly. So on the deep dive, we cut through all that noise to bring you the aha moments, those
Huh.
insights that make you feel truly informed without feeling like your brain just went through a blender.
We like to think of it as a fast track to being well-informed, a carefully curated deep dive into a fascinating subject, just for you.
And today's deep dive takes us on a remarkable journey through the life of a truly pivotal figure, Hasan Ali Shah, the first Aga Khan.
A figure who navigated immense challenges and ultimately left a lasting legacy.
Our mission today is to explore his life step by step, highlighting all his significant accomplishments. And we'll look at both sides of the coin, his spiritual leadership as the Imam of the Ismailis, intertwined with his actions in the temporal world.
It's a fascinating story, and we have some really incredible source material to work with, too. We have his own memoir, The Ibran Afsa, which gives us his direct perspective on events. But we also have a fascinating array of other sources, British archival records, Persian chronicles, and the vibrant living history preserved in Ismaili traditions.
A truly multifaceted view.
Absolutely, which is what makes this deep dive so captivating. We're going to uncover a story that moves between worlds.
All right, let's get started. Let's rewind the clock back to the 19th century. It was a time of huge change, especially in Persia and India, where empires were on shaky ground, new colonial powers were rising, and people's sense of religious identity was being reshaped.
A turbulent time indeed. And right in the middle of this swirling historical current, we find Hasan Ali Shah navigating these complexities.
He was born in 1804 in a place called Qajar in Persia, but he wasn't born into just any family. His father was Shah Khalilullah, the 45th Nizari Ismaili Imam. That's a lineage with a lot of history behind it.
Oh, absolutely. Understanding this ancestry is absolutely essential to grasping who Hasan Ali Shah was and the authority he held. This lineage traces all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad through his daughter, Fatima, and his son-in-law, Ali. So it's not just family ties, it's about spiritual legitimacy, a profound foundation for the respect he commanded.
And the Ismaili image itself, it's got its own incredible journey through history. Can you give us a little context?
Certainly. The Ismaili lineage arose from a big split within the Shia community way back in the 8th century. Over time, it grew into this powerful Fatimid Caliphate, which flourished in North Africa and then in Egypt between the 10th and 12th centuries. Think Cairo as this major hub, a center of learning and culture.
The home of Al-Azhar University.
Exactly, a period of tremendous intellectual and political influence. But like all empires, it eventually faced divisions and its own decline.
And then we come to the Nizari branch.
That's right. The Nizari Ismailis are those who followed Nizar, who challenged the succession to the Fatimid Caliphate in the late 11th century. And they had some remarkable leaders. Hassani Saba, for instance. They established these strategic fortresses, with Alamut being the most legendary.
The assassins. Now that's a story for the history books. I can't help but wonder, this lineage, with its dramatic history, how much of that shaped Hasan Ali Shah's own understanding of power and authority?
You know, that's a really intriguing question. While Alamut was centuries before his time, the memory of that resilient, independent Ismaili presence must have played a role in shaping their identity, even his own understanding of leadership in the face of adversity. But more immediately, the period after the Mongol invasions in the 13th century, which brought a brutal end to the Alamut era, had a huge impact. The Ismailis were scattered, and the Imams had to adopt taqiyya, a form of precautionary dissimulation, to protect their faith when things got dangerous. That experience, that history of resilience and navigating difficult times, would have been very real for them.
So by the 18th century, the Imam finds a new foothold in Persia. Hasan Ali Shah's father, Shah Khalilullah, was a figure of significant spiritual authority in Qajar. It sounded like they were almost like spiritual leaders within their own right.
It was a unique form of authority stemming from the devotion of their followers. But under the Qajar dynasty, which was consolidating its power in Persia, it was a precarious existence. The Qajars were always wary of any independent centers of influence, and they kept a close watch.
And then there's Hasan Ali Shah's mother, Bibi Sarkara. From what we know, she sounds like an extraordinary woman, a pillar of strength.
Oh, absolutely. Her role was critical, especially after the tragic events that struck the family. Think of young Hasan Ali's early life in Qajar. He was surrounded by this rich and challenging history, by the weight of his ancestry. The past wasn't some distant thing. It was a living reality that shaped their present.
And that tragedy, the assassination of his father, Shah Khalilullah, in 1817, It's a defining moment, and it must have had a profound impact on young Hasan Ali Shah.
A deeply shocking event, that's for sure. Shah Khalilullah had moved to Yazd, hoping to be closer to his many followers in India, and then this violence erupts, sparked by what seems like a minor dispute in the bazaar between Nizari followers and some Twelver Shia shopkeepers.
So almost a random act that quickly escalated.
Well, not entirely random. A key figure here is Mullah Hussein Yazdi, a Twelver Shia cleric who is known for his, let's say, very strong views. He seized upon this local incident. He resented the Imam and his followers in Yaz. He saw their presence as a threat, and he incited a mob. He turned a small quarrel into a full-blown attack on the Imam's residence.
A targeted attack.
Yes, a brutal one. Shah Khalilullah, who was 77 at the time, was killed along with several of his followers who tried to defend him. It was a horrific act of sectarian violence that left its mark on the community, especially on Hasan Ali Shah, who was only 13 years old when it happened.
13 years old and suddenly thrust into this situation. It must have been devastating. How did he respond?
Well, in the midst of that grief and chaos, Bibi Sarkara showed incredible strength. She immediately rallied the community to support her son as the new Imam, emphasizing the unbroken chain of their spiritual leadership. And then she made a very bold move. She appealed directly to the Qajar ruler, Fath Ali Shah, demanding justice.
A direct challenge to the highest authority. And how did the Shah react?
He was reportedly furious about the assassination, about this blatant disregard for the Imam's status. He ordered those responsible to be brought to justice, and crucially, he bestowed upon the young Hasan Ali Shah the title of Aga Khan, meaning Lord and Master. He also granted him a stipend, financial support, and the protection of the state.
So at 13, he inherits this immense spiritual responsibility, the imamate, but also this title and this promise of royal protection. This assassination, though horrific, seems to have set the stage for his later temporal power.
You're right. This was a pivotal moment, a turning point. It instilled in him a deep understanding of the vulnerability of his community and the necessity of wielding power, both spiritual and, or possible, temporal, to protect them. The title, Aga Khan, would become synonymous with him and his descendants. It was a stark lesson in the complex interplay between religious authority and the realities of politics.
Now, following his father's death and becoming their Aga Khan, he enters this period of youth and simultaneously significant political training. How did he navigate this transition into leadership?
Well, despite his young age, his succession as the 46th Imam was grounded in the core Ismaili belief in the Nur, the divine light, the inherent wisdom that passes down through the lineage of Imams. This spiritual authority was seen as intrinsic, regardless of age. But his mother, Bibi Sarkara, she knew the practical challenges he'd face. She made sure he was prepared.
So his education went beyond just religious teachings.
Oh, absolutely. Bibi Sarkara was very hands-on. She made sure he got a well-rounded education, a blend of spiritual and temporal knowledge. He delved deep into the Quran, the esoteric teachings of their tradition, nurturing his spiritual understanding and connection. But he was also tutored in things like statecraft, governance, diplomacy, even the strategies of warfare, essential skills for navigating the dangerous world of 19th century Persian politics.
And he was also summoned to the Qajar court in Tehran. That must have been a completely different world compared to Kahak or even Yazd.
Imagine this. The Qajar court filled with opulence, intricate social hierarchies, ambition, and constant political maneuvering. It was another crucial training ground. As a religious leader with a large following, he was treated with respect, but he was also probably viewed with suspicion by some, seen as a potential pawn in the power games of the court.
A fascinating but potentially dangerous place to learn the ropes of power.
Absolutely. He had a front row seat to observe these shifting alliances, the constant struggles for influence. He learned about the subtle yet very real ways in which authority was exercised and how fragile it could be. He learned the art of diplomacy, the importance of understanding people's motivations, invaluable lessons.
During this time, he also married Sarvi Jahan Khanum, a daughter of Fath Ali Shah himself, a move with obvious political implications.
A very strategic marriage indeed, probably arranged in the early 1820s. Marrying into the royal family offered a significant layer of protection, boosting his prestige within Persian society. It created a very real link between the Imamate and the ruling dynasty.
So a shrewd political alliance.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that his core identity, His primary source of authority for the Ismaili community remained rooted in his spiritual role, in that concept of the Nur, the divine light. His wife's royal lineage provided valuable support and recognition in the temporal realm, but it didn't change the fundamental source of his spiritual authority, his connection to his followers through the Nur.
So, by his early 20s, Hasan Ali Shah had faced immense personal loss, inherited this profound spiritual leadership role, gained significant political patronage, and made the strategic marriage. It sounds like he was incredibly well equipped for the challenges that lay ahead.
He was. The foundation was laid for him to emerge as a truly powerful figure, someone who could move effectively between the spiritual and temporal realms. The young boy from Kaihuk was now a leader, ready to navigate the turbulent waters of his time.
And a chance to exercise his leadership skills in the temporal realm came in 1834 when he was appointed the governor of Kerman. This was a strategically vital province, right?
It was. He was only 30 at the time when Fath Ali Shah gave him this position. Kerman was a major hub connecting Persia to India, Central Asia, Arabia. It was known for its textiles, its spices, its beautiful carpets. But its location also made it vulnerable to tribal unrest and external pressures.
So a position that came with significant responsibilities and challenges. Why do you think the Qajar court entrusted this key province to someone who, while well-connected, was still quite young?
I think they saw his potential. He was the Ismaili Imam. He commanded the respect and loyalty of diverse communities within Kerman, merchants, artisans, even nomadic tribes. They probably thought his spiritual authority, combined with his political skills, would be a good bet to keep things stable and the revenue flowing. There was a level of trust there.
And from what we know, he lived up to that trust, didn't he? He implemented some really significant reforms in Kerman.
He did. He tackled corruption within the administration, appointing officials known for their integrity. But importantly, he reinvested a lot of the tax revenue back into Kerman itself, financing public works like wells, better roads, new marketplaces, initiatives that directly benefited the people and fostered loyalty.
Makes sense. When people see improvements in their lives, they're more likely to support the leadership. And Kerman experienced a real economic boost under his rule.
A real transformation. He oversaw the repair and expansion of roads and bridges, making trade safer and more efficient. He also supported the expansion of caravansaries, those roadside inns for traders. And he was a patron of local artisans, especially the carpet weavers of Kerman. Their work added to the region's reputation and brought in more business. It was a time of real economic growth for the region.
And what about security? Maintaining order in such a diverse and geographically challenging region with the potential for tribal unrest must have been a constant concern.
It was. He took a two-pronged approach. Skillful diplomacy combined with a firm hand. He engaged in talks with the leaders of powerful nomadic tribes like the Baluch and the Qashqai, trying to align their interests with Kerman's stability and prosperity. His spiritual authority as the Imam gave him extra weight in those negotiations. And when diplomacy wasn't enough, he also had a local militia, strengthened with loyal Ismaili fighters. So he had a force he could rely on without having to always depend on the Qajar army.
It sounds like he was an incredibly effective governor, finding that balance between economic growth, the welfare of the people, and regional security. But you mentioned earlier that this success might have caused some tension with the Qajar court in Tehran.
Yes, it's a bit ironic, isn't it? Kerman's prosperity and stability, while seemingly good for the empire, started to make some people in Tehran uneasy. Muhammad Shah, who had succeeded Fath Ali Shah, and his influential and rather paranoid minister, Haji Mirza Qazi, started to see this growing autonomy, this wealth, as a potential challenge. What started as trust in his abilities began to turn into suspicion.
So the very things that made him a successful governor became points of friction. What was the main issue that caused this rift?
It all boiled down to control over the tax revenue. Remember how Hasan Ali Shah was investing a lot of that money back into Kerman itself? Well, the court in Tehran demanded the full tribute, seeing that revenue as theirs, essential for the empire.
And Hasan Ali Shah's response?
He didn't openly defy the Shah's demands, but he pushed back. He argued that Kerman's prosperity ultimately benefited the entire empire. But his arguments didn't sway Haji Mirza Akwasi, who I think was deeply suspicious of the Aga Khan's influence.
So Akwasi was a key player in this growing rift.
Absolutely. Akwasi saw this growing influence, both spiritual and temporal, as a threat to the Shah's power, and that fueled his demands and the increasingly hostile attitude towards Hasan Ali Shah in Kerman.
And it wasn't just pressure from Tehran. You mentioned renewed unrest among some tribal leaders.
As word of Tehran's displeasure spread, some tribal leaders saw an opportunity. Those who had previously been kept in check started raiding again, testing his resolve, perhaps hoping to exploit this perceived weakness.
So a difficult situation. Pressure from the central government and unrest on the ground. How did he handle it?
He did what he had to do. He put down the tribal unrest with his militia, showing he was still in control. But he also reached out to those leaders, trying to reaffirm their allegiances, reminding them of the benefits of stability. Many of them, still respecting him as the Imam, complied. But the tensions simmered.
And this eventually led to a breaking point in 1840.
Yes. In 1840, Muhammad Shah, under pressure from Akasi, issued an ultimatum: relinquish control of Kerman or face the full force of the Qajar army. And for Hasan Ali Shah, this wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about protecting his community and his mission as the Imam.
So this refusal wasn't just about personal ambition.
Not at all. He believed surrendering to the Shah's demands would leave his followers vulnerable. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, so he rallied his supporters, his Ismaili followers, local soldiers, sympathetic tribal leaders, and essentially brought the region to the brink of open rebellion.
And that brink was crossed. In late 1840 and into 1841, armed resistance broke out against the Qajars.
It was a direct confrontation. When he made it clear he wouldn't give up Kerman, the Qajar army marched south to take it back by force.
A formidable force. He couldn't have matched them in terms of numbers and resources.
He knew that. He had to be strategic. He rallied all the support he could. His devoted Ismaili followers, local militiamen, and any tribes who were on his side or at least opposed to direct Qajar rule. He focused on fortifying Kerman, using its existing defenses to hold out as long as possible. The initial clashes were intense, and he managed to hold them back for a while.
So some initial success.
Yes. His leadership and the commitment of his fighters allowed them to hold off the Qajar army. The terrain also helped, but the Qajar forces were relentless.
And eventually they broke through.
They did. By mid-1841, after a prolonged siege, Kerman's defenses were breached. Supplies dwindled, his coalition began to weaken, and he faced a difficult choice.
Surrender or fight to the death.
Essentially, he made a strategic decision. He chose to retreat. Under the cover of night, he led his family, including his wife, Sarvi Jahan Khanim, and their children, and his most loyal followers out of the city, escaping the Qajar forces. They fled into Baluchistan, a desperate situation, but a strategic move to preserve the imamate and his community.
Into the wilderness, with his family and followers. A very dangerous journey.
An incredible ordeal. Imagine this. Crossing those harsh, unforgiving landscapes with limited supplies, constantly under threat, and carrying the responsibility for the survival of so many people, it was a test of endurance and leadership.
And the Baluch tribes, they weren't known for being welcoming to outsiders.
No, they were fiercely independent and could be very dangerous.
Yeah.
But again, Hasan Ali Shah's diplomacy proved vital. He negotiated safe passage, securing the cooperation of key tribal leaders. His spiritual standing and his reputation for cleverness were key in those negotiations.
Even in retreat, those qualities were assets. Where did this journey ultimately lead them?
To Herat, a city in Afghanistan. At the time, this region was in turmoil because of the First Anglo-Afghan War. Herat was ruled by Kamran Mirza, a weak Durrani prince, and his powerful vizier, Yar Muhammad Khan. They offered the group temporary refuge.
Right in the middle of a war zone. Did he just try to stay out of the way, or did he get involved?
He was a very keen observer. He watched the power dynamics between the British and the Afghans very carefully, assessing the strengths and weaknesses of each side. Kamran Mirza probably welcomed him cautiously, maybe seeing him as a potential ally, or at least wanting to avoid making an enemy out of him.
And it's in Herat that he has his first encounters with British officials.
Exactly. British officers were stationed in Herat following their siege of the city in 1838. And these meetings were significant. The British were deeply involved in the Great Game, that rivalry with Russia for influence in Central Asia. They were always on the lookout for influential figures who could be useful to them. And Hasan Ali Shah, with his courtly manners, his noble background, his experience as a governor, his knowledge of Persia and the tribes, he was someone they wanted to get to know.
The beginning of a strategic alliance.
You could say that. The British saw his potential value, and for Hasan Ali Shah, these interactions opened up new possibilities. He was exiled from Persia, and he saw a potential future for himself and his community in this new world. And that's when he starts looking toward Sindh and India, where British influence was already strong.
And this brings us to his involvement in the First Anglo-Afghan War and the start of British support for him.
His arrival in Sindh, which was already under British influence, coincided with the war. And this war was proving much more difficult for the British than they'd expected. They needed allies they could trust, and that's where Hasan Ali Shah came in.
What exactly did they see in him that made him so valuable?
It was a combination of things. His experience governing Kerman, his connections to influential networks, his knowledge of the region, and his loyal followers. They saw in him someone who understood power, who had practical experience in a network of loyal fighters, someone they could work with.
And he made a formal offer of military support.
He did. In late 1841, with British facing setbacks, he offered them his support, leading a contingent of his Ismaili horsemen and other fighters in Sindh. We don't have all the details of their involvement, but it seems they helped secure British supply lines and quell unrest in those areas.
So he stepped up when the British were in a tight spot. And how did they respond?
The East India Company, which was running British India at the time, was grateful. They gave him a generous pension and recognized him as a princely ally, giving him a level of status he hadn't had before. It was a huge turning point for him. It gave him and his family security in India, and importantly, it formally solidified the title Aga Khan in the context of British India.
From exile to recognition and support within the British Empire. Quite a turnaround.
It was a real testament to his ability to adapt and navigate a complex political landscape.
He then relocated to India, settling in Bombay in the late 1840s. What was he looking to achieve in this new environment?
Bombay in the 1840s was booming, a center of trade and colonial administration. He was welcomed by the British elite, who remembered his service and his value. He had a comfortable life there, but he also set his sights on something much bigger.
The Qajar Ismaili community.
Exactly. This was a large and prosperous community in western India that had a historical connection to the Nizari Imams going back centuries. They had been sending religious tithes and recognizing the Imam's authority, but over time that connection had become somewhat distant.
A community with its own long history.
They had been converted by Nizari missionaries called Dayas back in the 13th century, and despite the distance, had maintained this tradition of acknowledging the Imam in Persia.
And Hasan Ali Shah saw the potential of this community.
He did. He wanted to revitalize that connection. He traveled extensively, visiting their Jamat-khanas, issuing firmans, authoritative decrees to clarify doctrine and reaffirm his leadership. He was bridging that distance, building a direct relationship.
And the Qajas, as successful traders, represented a vital resource, didn't they?
They were very successful. They controlled vast trading networks across the Indian Ocean, from Bombay to Zanzibar to Aden. Their wealth could provide a solid foundation for the Imam in India. And in turn, his spiritual leadership provided guidance and unity. It was a mutually beneficial relationship.
It's fascinating how he was able to leverage these different relationships, the British and the Qajas, to build a new base for the Ismaili Imamate in India.
It was a masterclass in strategy. He was laying the groundwork for a global Imamate.
And in the 1850s and 1860s, he really focused on building and unifying the Ismaili community in India.
He wanted to strengthen their shared identity, their connection to the Imamate. He traveled to their Jamat-khanas all over Western India, reinforcing his spiritual authority and bringing them together.
But you mentioned earlier that the community wasn't entirely unified in its practices.
Yes, that's right. The Qajas, especially in places like Bombay, were very prosperous. They had integrated into Indian society. Some had been influenced by mainstream Sunni practices, and some, perhaps because of their wealth, felt quite independent. It was a challenge for him.
So how did he bring them together, solidify their Ismaili identity?
Through firmans, these decrees, they clearly laid out Ismaili doctrine, clarified rituals and practices, re-emphasized his authority as the Imam. They standardized religious life, strengthening their identity under his leadership.
And the Qajas' wealth was vital to supporting this, right? They had a tradition of paying tithes to the Imam.
Yes, they did. And Hasan Ali Shah formalized the system in India, establishing councils to manage these funds. He appointed trusted leaders, called mukis, ensuring transparency and accountability. And these funds were used for the benefit of the community, building new Jamat-khanas, supporting education, helping the less fortunate. It was a way of giving back and strengthening the community from within.
A very practical approach.
It was. He was intertwining spiritual guidance with their worldly success. And it wasn't always smooth sailing. Some Qajas resisted his reforms, his authority over their affairs, and this ultimately led to one of the defining events of his life in India.
The Aga Khan case of 1866, a landmark legal battle that really tested his leadership.
It was a huge challenge. The case exposed the simmering tensions within the community. Essentially, it was a clash between those who supported his authority and those who resisted it.
And the core of this challenge was,
Control and authority, especially his efforts to consolidate control over religious life and finances. Some Khojas, those who held on to Sunni practices or resented his financial oversight, they pushed back. And they were led by prominent figures, wealthy merchants like Haji Bibi and Habib Ibrahim. They refused to pay tithes and questioned his legitimacy, claiming the Khojas were actually Sunni Muslims.
so, a direct challenge to his position as the Imam.
Exactly. They took the matter to the Bombay High Court, hoping to wrest control of Khoja communal property and assets from him. It was a risky move. They essentially asked the British legal system to adjudicate an internal religious dispute.
It must have been a tense time for the community. How did Hasan Ali Shah respond?
He stood his ground. He was present in the courtroom throughout the trial, and his legal team, which included his son, Aga Ali Shah, mounted a vigorous defense, presenting historical evidence tracing the Khoja's Nizari roots back to those medieval days. They presented firmans, testimonies from loyalists. It was a battle fought on legal and theological grounds.
A real clash of interpretations. And what was the outcome?
It was a decisive victory for Hasan Ali Shah. The judge, Sir Joseph Arnold, ruled unequivocally in his favor. He declared that the Khojas were a distinct Shia sect, that Hasan Ali Shah was their rightful imam, and that he had the authority over their communal assets.
So the British legal system upheld his authority.
Yes, a huge victory. It cemented his spiritual and temporal leadership in the eyes of the British and within the Khoja community itself. Some dissenters broke away, forming a separate Sunni Khoja group, but the vast majority rallied around him. This legal victory had lasting consequences. It officially recognized the distinct identity of the Khoja Ismailis as a separate religious community.
And what about his relationship with the British Raj after the case?
It was a complex relationship, but ultimately it served him well. The British saw him as a stabilizing influence, a moderate voice within the Muslim community. They valued his loyalty and support, which he had demonstrated during the Afghan War. He, in turn, benefited from their patronage. They gave him financial support for his community initiatives.
But it wasn't without its constraints.
Of course. He had to play the game of colonial politics. He had to be mindful of British interests and expectations. There was pressure to distance himself from the Persian court, which the British viewed with suspicion.
A balancing act.
It was. But he was skilled at it.
Yeah.
He acted as a mediator between the British and Persia when tensions arose. He also played a wider role in India's Muslim community, advocating for education and unity. He earned respect as a scholar and a philanthropist.
So a complex relationship, but one that ultimately helped secure his legacy in India.
Absolutely. The alliance with the British was crucial in allowing him to build a strong foundation for the Imam in India.
And as we enter his later years, he was still very active, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. In the late 1870s, he resided mainly in Bombay, often at his residence, Aga Hall. He continued to oversee the community, engage in Persian and Indian affairs, though from a distance, and prepare for his succession. He was a man of deep faith, blending prayer with counsel. He constantly urged his followers to pursue education, to strive for unity, and his family was always by his side, his wife, Sarvi Jahan Khanum, and their children, including his heir, Aga Ali Shah.
A life well lived.
Absolutely. A life that spanned continents and empires, marked by resilience and a profound impact.
And in 1881, at the age of 77, he passed away peacefully at Aga Hall.
A moment of profound loss for the community. He was buried in Hassanabad, a site he himself had chosen in Bombay, which became a place of pilgrimage for his followers. His later years were a time of reflection, a bridge between his past in Persia and the future of his community in India.
A legacy that continues to this day.
It does. The transition to his son, Aga Ali Shah, as the next Aga Khan was seamless. The Nur, the divine light, passed on. Aga Ali Shah continued his father's work, consolidating the community, maintaining those vital relationships with the British. But it was really Hasan Ali Shah's grandson, Aga Khan III, who would take the Imam into a new era.
Born in 1877, just a few years before his grandfather's passing.
That's right. And it was the groundwork laid by Hasan Ali Shah that moved to India. The alliance with the British, the unification of the Khojas, the legal victory that secured his authority and assets that enabled Aga Khan III to really modernize the Ismaili community. Aga Ali Shah, the second Aga Khan, passed away just 4 years into his imamate in 1885, leaving his young son, Sultan Muhammad Shah, to become Aga Khan III at the tender age of 8. but the community was ready.
So Hasan Ali Shah's life, a life that began in Persia, marked by upheaval and exile, ultimately helped shape the future of the Ismailis, paving the way for their success in India and beyond.
Exactly. His resilience, his vision laid the foundation for a global community.
It's an incredible story. We've covered a lot of ground today, from his birth in Persia to the assassination of his father, his time as governor, the flight to India, the legal battles, the community building, and the ultimate legacy that continues through his successors.
A life that intertwines spiritual leadership with temporal power in a way that few could have imagined.
And it makes you think, how much do the challenges of leadership, the need to balance different forces, resonate even today in a completely different world? How do individual actions shape communities, create ripple effects that last for generations?
It's fascinating to see how history can inform our present and give us food for thought as we face our own complex world.
Absolutely. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive, but as always, we leave you with something to ponder. We've explored Hasan Ali Shah's incredible journey and the foundations he laid for the Ismaili Imamat. But what about the future of this community, now led by his descendant, the 50th Imam, Shah Aga Khan? How will they navigate the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century? That's a story yet to be written.
And one we'll all be watching unfold.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Until next time.